Look, we all know how this works by now. Social media is full of quotes that sound deep but don't actually change how you think or live. Self development and coaching can sometimes just feel like noise. Follow your passion. Everything happens for a reason. Just believe in yourself. Tomorrow is another day. They're all comforting and they're all shareable, but they're also largely useless when life gets uncomfortable because real self development doesn't come from quotes that make you feel better. It comes from ideas that remove your excuses. So, what I wanted to do today is a bit different and share 11 quotes that I actually use, not because they sound good and are poetic, but because they actually help me regulate my behavior and hold me to account. Not every day, but when I need them and things get uncertain, uncomfortable, or I feel exposed. And some are philosophical, some come from sport. One comes literally from a 90s dance track, but every single one has earned its place. So let's get into it. The first one is, it's not the critic that counts, it's the man in the arena. I absolutely love that. And it was from Theodore Roosevelt originally, but I saw it and it was popularized by Brené Brown in her book, Daring Greatly. I can't tell you how many times I read that when I first saw it. I was having a tough time with lots of critics at that time. And let me tell you, some of it was vile. I'll put a passage on of the full quote on the screen now. I don't use it to ignore criticism. I use it when I need to remind myself to stop outsourcing self-worth, because the real danger of visibility and making an impact isn't the criticism. Okay, the criticism is a feature of being visible and making an impact. So the danger is in fact not recognizing that. And that's when you can start letting critics or likes or comments or even silence and other people's reactions determine whether you do something or whether something was good or worth doing. And that's when you stop kind of acting who you want to be and you start managing the perception of others. So this quote reminds me to decide in advance who actually gets a vote, whose feedback can inform me, and realize that actually the rest doesn't count. Do you want to play in the pitch? Of course you do. You don't want to stand on the sidelines or in the stands like journalists. Okay, that's the distinction that keeps you moving forward when exposure or silence gets uncomfortable. And that's why I love that quote. Okay, the second one is, the map is not the territory, from Alfred Korzybski. I think that pronunciation is correct. This was introduced to me first by one of my coaches, and this one changed the way that I see beliefs. Okay, beliefs are solid, but they are often just models. They are maps of the world that we create in our heads. The maps are usually drawn from our limited experience or from information that we consume, usually from biased media, or worse, from corporations that we work for who've got an agenda. Or perhaps they're projected maps from others upon us, parents, teachers, our mates, narcissistic boss perhaps. Okay, the map that we have is also full of simplifications and filters. And the longer you live without testing it, the more you mistake it for the truth. And you say things like, I'm just not that kind of person, or this never works for me. That's just how things are. But this is not the territory, it's the map. And maps that haven't been updated for years. I look at a pint of lager now and I see it as some liquid in a glass. Someone else will look at the same thing and see it as a gateway to confidence. The territory is exactly the same. The thing is the same. Our maps of the world are completely different. So reality doesn't punish you for being wrong. It just punishes you for refusing to look outside of your view of the world. And that is why I love that quote. Okay, the third one is, strong beliefs loosely held. And I use that as a decision-making aphorism, I guess. And I fell in love with this concept when I first heard it, because it gives you so much permission to be relentless in the pursuit of your goals, but it also gives you permission to be adaptable and flexible in what you choose to pursue. It's attributed to a guy called Paul Sappho, who was a futurist and a technology forecaster, and he developed that concept for making forecasts in uncertain times. For me, it represents the difference between conviction and ego. Weak people avoid commitment completely, excuses everywhere, victim mentality and safety nets everywhere. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have, fragile people who cling on to commitment. They cling on to it so much that they are broken if they lose the thing that they're gripping. So what I've learned is actually you need to have two things that may seem paradoxical. You need strength to act decisively, but you need looseness to change when reality disagrees with you or when new evidence surfaces. The moment a belief becomes your identity, you stop learning. So progress requires the courage to say things like, yes, this worked, until it didn't. And that's not always inconsistency. It could, in fact, be the intelligence needed. And wow, how that has served me since I started Onto, which is why I love that quote. Okay, number 4 is emotions are a performance attribute. And this is performance psychology. And it's a principle. And I attribute this to Steve Peters, Dr. Steve Peters, in fact, who offered me this insight directly back in 2016. And I'm not being dramatic when I say that this reframed everything for me. And it kind of summarizes 90% of self-help books into one sentence. Emotions are not problems to suppress. They are calls to action for us to manage. And if you can practice and learn how to manage them, you can perform better than 90% of people out there. Under pressure, unmanaged emotion doesn't affect just your mood. It degrades pretty much everything about us. And I've seen talented people implode, not because they lack the skill, but because emotion took the wheel at the wrong moment. The same emotion can have very different outcomes. So fear can be paralysis, or it can be preparation. Anger can be a reaction, or it can provide clarity. Or stress can convert into months of bad habits or relentless focus. I could go on. Every emotion that we feel can have a reframe and have a response. So the work isn't feeling less and pushing everything down. We've all been there. The work is actually deciding who's in charge, and when the feeling and emotion spikes, taking ownership of it. So thank you, Steve, for that one. That is why I love that quote. Okay, the 5th one is the highest reward for toil is not what you get for it, but what you become for it. Wow. And that's attributed to a guy called John Ruskin. And Jesus Christ, if only I had that wisdom when I was 20. The highest reward for toil is not what you get for it, but what you become for it. Okay, ultra running makes this impossible to ignore. If the reward was simply to finish or the medal, you would quit early. In fact, you wouldn't even be at the start line because the finish is fleeting. And let's be honest, the medals are cheap and they mean nothing. Even the prize money for elites is laughable. What lasts is who you have become and what you have endured during the toil, as the quote goes. You've become calmer under fatigue. You've become disciplined when motivation just vanished, or, you've become more prepared for stuff that lies ahead and the unknown. You've become honest with yourself and capable of staying focused when quitting is available and comfort is available all of the time. And all of that toil, it carries over into everything else, into leadership, relationships, hard conversations. So, outcomes fade, but the capacity to perform just compounds over time the more we are prepared to toil. So next time you question others who suffer out of choice, just go to that quote. The highest reward for toil is not what you get from it, but what you become from it. That is magic. That is why I love that quote. Okay, the 6th one is, I'm going to try and sing this one. Freed from desire, mind and senses purified. Yeah, I've not got a great singing voice, but that is a banger. And it's attributed to Gala, Freed from Desire. the most misheard lyric of all time. Those last 4 words of that lyric, mind and senses purified. It took me years to realize what that lyric was. And it sounds light, but it isn't. That line taught me, I guess, the difference between ambition and compulsion, and that compulsive desire that creates noise, it creates comparison, restlessness. It leads us to try and force outcomes. And more than anything, it creates this belief of scarcity, this overwhelming feeling of lack. I have not, I want, I need, I deserve. And it kills any kind of fulfillment or joy or psychological peace that is available to us. I learn to choose my goals now carefully and limit my desires to the things that matter. As the lyric goes, this makes it easier to purify your mind and purify your senses. And it makes it easier. It doesn't solve all that mental turbulence completely, but my God, it makes it easier to manage. I had a client who came to me, listed out about 50 different goals that he wanted to accomplish in 12 months. And he wondered why he was constantly frustrated, agitated, and felt like he was failing. Okay, surrender some of the desires. When you loosen your grip on so many desires, it enables you to be sharper with the decisions that matter. Less craving for goals or desires doesn't make you passive. It just makes you more deliberate and likely more content as well, which is why I love that one. Okay, number 7 is life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. Courage is a value of mine and I love it. And that quote is attributed to Anaïs Nin. She's an author, but she's also an erotic writer, I think, by all accounts. But I don't read that quote as poetry at all. I read it as mechanics, and have started viewing the world as mechanical, not moral. Let me explain what I mean. The way that I see that quote is this: avoided conversations are going to shrink your world. It's as simple as that. Every time you allow your fears to conquer you, you lose out on something. When you make up a sophisticated excuse to protect you, you just reinforce a belief of low self-trust. Okay, so that quote reminds me that courage doesn't feel bold in the moment. It feels awkward, slightly exposing even, often really inconvenient. It reminds me that confidence comes later, if at all, but it also reminds me that life expands when you lean into it. And that is why I love that quote. Okay, number 8 is untold expectations are predetermined resentments. I'm not sure who I can attribute that quote to, but it's a personal leadership principle of mine now. I heard it, it stuck with me. I'm not even sure where I heard it. I even Googled it before making this video and I cannot find who to attribute it to. Untold expectations are predetermined resentments. This explains more broken relationships than anything else. And resentment usually isn't caused by betrayal. It's caused by silence. When you have an expectation, but you don't state that expectation, you create a silent contract. But then you end up punishing the people around you for not signing it, even though it doesn't exist. Your team, your partner, your boss, your family. It rings true across the whole board, which is why if we start a point with the words, I would have expected you to have X, it's often a really weak starting point, okay? Because we have to be clear to be kind. I've learned that the hard way. And if you didn't say it out loud, you don't get to resent it. Okay, so clarity early prevents resentment later is another word of putting it. And I absolutely love that quote. Okay, number 9 is most men live lives of quiet desperation, from David Thoreau. Wow. This one hits because it's subtle and it smacked me personally right between the eyes. Okay, my dad was a case study for that and I'm hyper aware of it. The sneaky thing is that quiet desperation is never about hitting rock bottom. Okay, it's not about getting to a point where things are so bad that the motivation for change is so great that you have to do something. Okay, that you have no choice. You're forced into survival. Quiet desperation is in fact 100 times worse than that, because it's low level, tolerable dissatisfaction. That makes sense. Okay, it's low level, tolerable dissatisfaction. And because it's tolerable, most tolerate it. Okay, they allow the existence of something that they dislike without any interference or change. Life that looks fine but feels constrained. No crisis or collapse. It just feels like a never ending endurance race without any alignment or joy. And it means that people don't change. People don't change because it is tolerable. The quiet desperation is tolerable, and it's a complete fucking wasted opportunity. This really hit me for six. And I'm not ashamed to say it. I would go as far as to say that it empowered me to take a really deep look at myself, and it drove me to personal change as well. And the rest is history, as they say, which is why I absolutely love that quote. Okay, number 10 is make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. I had to introduce some stoicism into that. That one's from Epictetus. And I couldn't do this video without a reference to stoicism. And I don't mean the philosophy as a theory. I mean it as a way of actually doing stuff and operating. Okay, the Stoics weren't trying to make us feel good. They were trying to function well under pressure. They were soldiers, they were leaders, they were teachers, they were dealing with real issues, the same stuff that we deal with: uncertainty, loss, fatigue, responsibility, wealth, identity. And their core question was simple: what is actually within our control and what isn't? Because once you answer that honestly, a lot of the shit that we have to deal with actually disappears. And this is one of the cleanest rules that I know, and it's most anxiety that we have comes from misplaced responsibility, trying to control outcomes instead of inputs. In sport, in leadership, in life, the effort is yours, preparation is yours, the response is yours, and outcomes are not. Okay, calm performers outperform emotional ones because they know exactly where the responsibility ends. So let me repeat that one. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Okay, number 11 is from a guy called Alan Watts, who is amazing to listen to. And it goes like this: trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. From Alan Watts. I laughed when I first heard this one, and I love Alan Watts, especially when it's mixed with some Akiri the Don. I'm going to put a link in the description to that because it's amazing. This quote helped me dismantle how I think about identity, because most people believe identity is something that you discover, that if you think hard enough and analyze enough or reflect long enough, that you finally land on who you really are. Alan Watts is pointing out how flawed that idea is. You can't step outside yourself and then define yourself, because there is no fixed object to define. Most people call identity is just sameness, which refers actually back to the origin of the word: repeated behaviors, repeated actions, repeated emotional patterns. Okay, in other words, identity is repeated beingness, not some sort of magical essence or anything romantic. It's simple. It's a habit. But because people go through life saying things like, that's just not who I am, or I've always been like this, or I'm not built for that, or that's not me. What they're really saying is, this is just how I usually behave. And then they defend it, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. Sameness feels safe and coherent, and it feels like your identity, even when it's quietly suffocating us. So this quote confirms a truth that I like to be reminded of, that I can't define myself, but that's okay, because I'm always changing, and you don't need to always know who you are. You just need to stop always being the same. So that's it, 11 of the best. Okay, these quotes aren't there just to post. They're reminders to return to. Okay, when comfort is tempting or courage is required, or when you're having a really shit day and need some perspective. I'm not interested in Instagram motivation. I'm interested in ideas that can help you act when no one's watching, and when outcomes are not guaranteed, and when the shit really hits the fan. That's where trust and self-trust is built. Okay, if this resonates, I write a private letter each week. It's free, it's helpful, and it will make an impact. I'm going to put a link in the description. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.